Yo, what's up guys, welcome back to another video. This is a reaction to your surrounded enclave cities in the US. I don't really know what this means, to be honest. I'm here for its geography and its geography king. But in terms of enclave cities, is it cities that are got an enclave and an exclave? So an exclave is a country that's surrounded by another country or something like that, or a country that's surrounded by another country within its own country. I can't actually remember. I just know it's countries or cities or whatever surrounded by other things. But yeah, we're going to check this out to see, because I don't really know what this means, to be honest, and I'm just intrigued to see. But yeah, hopefully going to enjoy. Hopefully you're all doing well, and let's check this video out.
Howdy, it's Kyle talking about enclave cities.
Oh, he's quiet.
An enclave is a jurisdiction completely surrounded by another jurisdiction.
Right, I'm going to turn his audio up because he's quite quiet. If it gets really loud at some point, I apologise.
We're talking about cities in the U.S. completely surrounded by other cities. Perhaps the most well-known enclave on a global scale is the southern African nation of Lesotho, which is completely surrounded by South Africa. And there are many cities in the U.S. that are just like that. It's worth noting
I do wonder how this even happens in the first place.
In the country that have enclave cities within their states. I'm not sure if it's due to state laws or just coincidence, but all of these are just in a handful of states. There are multiple types of enclaves, but I'm only going to be discussing one type. What I will not be discussing are areas of unincorporated county that are surrounded by a city. And I will also not be discussing a handful of these little tiny spots that are almost like this, like a little neighborhood that are incorporated, that are surrounded by a much larger city but don't have any own city services. So what I will be looking at are more like real type cities that are surrounded by a much larger one. So these enclaves will have their own city services, usually a police department, sometimes fire department, but it is its own functioning city. There are more enclaves in the US than can be discussed in this video, but I do want to go over some of the most interesting ones. I'm going to start in Texas, where you have the largest number of these enclave cities, and I'm going to Houston first. There are 3 different enclaves within Houston. The first one I'm going to discuss is Bel Air. It has a population of about 17,000 people, and Houston itself has about 2.3 million. It's located a few miles west of downtown and is about 3.5 square miles in area. Bel Air was incorporated in 1918, and it was separate from Houston, which wasn't growing out that far yet, but it was growing and eventually surrounded it. Many other areas that were unincorporated in Harris County eventually did join Houston, but not.
So if you're from here, you say you're from Bel Air, and you don't say you're from Houston. That's pretty cool. I guess the prices don't listen to that though. I feel like the prices here still go up in terms of Houston prices, right? You're feeling the effects of that still.
Bel Air. And during the big interstate boom, Interstate 610 was built and goes right through this small town of Bel Air, bisecting it. Damn. Originally, it was a middle-class enclave. It wasn't super wealthy, but now it is a very wealthy enclave. It became a rich part of the Houston area in the 90s. So most of the population that lives there now is pretty wealthy. It only has about a 2% poverty rate. However, it isn't just residential and bedroom community. It does have some office complex high-rises and many oil company offices. Another enclave in Houston and directly adjacent to Bel Air is West University Place. It has a population of about 15,000 people and is about 2 square miles, so it's just a little bit smaller than Bel Air. It's called West University Place because it's located just west of the campus of Rice University, although Rice itself is in the city of Houston. It was incorporated in 1924 because Houston wouldn't extend the power lines to it, so they kind of had to start off on their own. And very similar to Bel Air, it wasn't wealthy originally, but in the 90s it started being much more of a wealthy enclave, much bigger houses being constructed. And to this day, the household income is over $200,000.
That is one beautiful home.
In West University Place. But unlike Bel Air, West University Place is
this is a nice place.
Mostly a bedroom community. There are very few businesses there, and it's mostly just wealthy neighborhoods.
Very nice.
And the third one that's located in Houston is directly adjacent to both Bel Air and West University Place, and it's called Southside Place.
So they're all just quite close to each other then?
This one is much smaller than the other two. There are only 1,900 people there, and the area is only 1/4 of a square mile.
Like, surely if you're from here, you just say you're from Houston, right? Like, realistically, this is barely an area itself. There's a Mini Cooper here. What are the chances of that? I don't feel like you see Mini Coopers in the US a lot.
It was incorporated in 1925, 1 year after West University Place and directly adjacent to it, and for similar reasons. And this little town of Southside Place is really just 8 residential streets about 1 block wide. They have a separate police department, but the fire department is shared with Bel Air and West University Place.
That is so mad. They got their own police What the fuck? I love these sort of quirky places, man. I really do.
So those are the 3 enclaves for Houston. Now let's go up to Dallas, where there are a couple more. The 2 enclaves of Dallas I'll be discussing are referred to as the Park Cities, University Park, and Highland Park. University Park has about 26,000 people and is about 3.7 square miles, and that's compared to Dallas's 1.3 million people and 386 square miles. And just like the 3 enclaves in Houston, the 2 park cities in Dallas are adjacent to each other, but both completely surrounded by Dallas. But unlike West University Place in Houston, University Park, Dallas actually is home to a university. It's where Southern Methodist University is, or SMU. The university was founded in 1915, so this little neighborhood around it, University Park, just started off as kind of a small college town, college village around SMU, because Dallas didn't extend that far north then. It became an independent city in 1924 by popular vote. But very similar to Houston's enclaves, University Park wasn't originally really wealthy, but it is now.
Damn.
It's essentially a private city. There are no public parks. Actually, the public parks are only accessible to people who are city residents. I'm sure there are people that will defend that by saying that people pay taxes there. They should be the only ones that use those parks, but I'd be willing to bet the people that live in University Park go to
That's mental.
the Dallas public parks. The other of the park cities is Highland Park. It has about 9,000
This is
people.
still really quiet. I apologize. I'm trying not to make it too loud because I don't want to like audio jumps where he just starts talking loud again.
And it's about 2.2 square miles, so it's quite a bit smaller than University Park. It was incorporated in 1913 because Dallas didn't want it. And interesting about Highland Park, it lost population since the 1960s until 2020. And something very interesting about the city is that it has no traditional police department. The paramedics and the firefighters are also the law enforcement. Something else interesting about this enclave is that it's home to Highland Park Village, the first mall in the U.S. I'm not sure how they truly define it, but it's the first thing where it's like one giant unit divided up into many different businesses, but can be sold as that one giant unit. And so this village complex has been sold many times through the years, but it always remains expensive retail. So the general trend of the enclave cities in Texas are to be really wealthy areas separate from the larger city.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'm going to Michigan, another state that has several enclave cities, and here I'm going to go to Detroit that has 2 enclaves. And just like Houston and Dallas, the 2 enclaves for Detroit are adjacent to each other.
Hamtramck, is it that one?
But the 2 combined are surrounded by the city of Detroit. The first one I'm going to discuss is Hamtramck. There are about 27,000 people in the city, and it's about 2 square miles in area.
They're all just the same homes. It's pretty interesting looking.
It's had population loss since 1930, so Hamtramck was losing population before Detroit was, and the only population in the past 100 years has been in the 1990s and 2010s with a big influx of refugees. In the 1990s, many refugees from Albania and Bosnia came to the Detroit area.
Some
and
soccer.
In the 2010s, there was many refugees from Yemen coming to Detroit. So with many Albanians, Bosnians, Bengalis, and Yemenis, many of the folks there are Muslim, and Hamtramck is the only Muslim majority city in the entire country.
Damn.
Here's an ethnic breakdown of Hamtramck. It's about 20% Bangladeshi, 11% Pakistani, 5% Indian, and overall about 36% South Asian. It's also about 9% Yemeni, 5% Macedonian, 3% Ukrainian, and 3% Albanian.
Damn.
But despite being surrounded by Detroit, it's only 5% black. Until the mid-20th century, most of the city was Polish immigrants who worked in many of the factories, but most of those factories shut down. So the city was basically dying until the 1970s when many Bangladeshis started to move there and opened up the first mosque in 1976. And the city really does kind of feel just like a giant ethnic enclave within the city of Detroit, which isn't the most ethnically diverse city in the U.S. The other enclave of Detroit and directly adjacent to Hamtramck is Highland Park. So just like in Dallas, there's a Highland Park enclave in Detroit. It has a population of about 8,000 people.
And yeah, you can see big homes already.
And it's about 3 square miles. So it has 1/3 the population of Hamtramck, but is larger in area. And as you might expect, that means a lot of empty areas in Highland Park, and it's been losing population since the 1930s. It peaked at 52,000 in 1930.
Maybe not.
This was essentially the Chrysler company town and headquarters until 1992 before they moved to the suburbs. So you figure basically the entire 20th century, the city was a company town, and that company
I was so wrong.
went away, so the town basically went dying along with it. But it wasn't just Chrysler that went away. There was a Ford plant that was built there in 1913 with an assembly line. However, by the 1950s, much of the Ford plant was demolished, and Ford was completely gone in Highland Park by 1973. The
Damn.
city does have a separate police and fire department, but things got so bad in the early 2000s that Wayne County Sheriff and Fire had to take over those services in the city. And in stark contrast to Hamtramck being very racially diverse with many people from Muslim countries, many of them refugees, Highland Park is 88% black. So that means that even though Highland Park and Hamtramck are adjacent to each other, both have high poverty, they're quite a bit different with their ethnic makeup. Okay, now I'm heading out to the West Coast and Los Angeles, which has several enclave cities within it. The first two I'm going to mention are just like the other ones I mentioned previously in that they're adjacent to each other, and then both combined are surrounded by Los Angeles. The first of those two is the city of West Hollywood.
I do feel like LA is just like a city made up of small towns that just ended up joining. Obviously, LA is its own city as well, but I feel like a lot of it is just like enclave cities that ended up just sort of getting bigger and bigger and then just joining up. If that makes sense. I could be wrong with that, to be honest, but
created in 1984, and there are about 35,000 people in the city. Prior to incorporation, this area around West Hollywood was a collection of previously unincorporated parts of the county, and in 1984, the city voted to incorporate so they can enact really strong rent control laws. And although West Hollywood is above average income for the LA area, it's not as wealthy as some of the other places in that region to the west and north. Part of West Hollywood is Sunset Boulevard and the Sunset Strip. This is where you have lots of bars, clubs, live music venues, some UCLA bars, one called Dublin's where I got kicked out of in the 90s. The city is home to the largest Halloween party in the U.S. Every year, about 500,000 people attend this large outdoor Halloween party. And it almost feels like the downtown of all of the rich areas in the west side of LA. But it's also well known as having a large gay population. And West Hollywood also has a large population of Russian-speaking Jews. In fact, it's the largest Russian-speaking population in the U.S. after Brighton Beach in Brooklyn. So many of the things when people think about L.A., they're thinking about actually in the city of West Hollywood, which is separate than L.A. Adjacent to West Hollywood to the west is another enclave, that being Beverly Hills. There are about 32,000 people in the city, but it's been losing...
What is it? Beverly Hills is its own city?
...population since the 2010s.
I didn't know that.
And although the city is known to be a very wealthy and exclusive enclave, it wasn't designed as that. Oil was discovered there in 1900 in an oil field, and it became a separate city in 1914, which is well before the big Hollywood boom. And to this day, it still is an active oil field. There are about 97 wells disguised within the city. So although originally it was not designed to be a rich enclave, it was designed to be an all-white, non-Jewish enclave. Although segregation in Beverly Hills ended in 1948 after a lawsuit by wealthy actors who were not white. And not all of Beverly Hills is super wealthy. All of it's at least kind of wealthy, but the southern half of the city is just kind of normal old rich folks, not the big-time, celebrity-type rich people. The city is well known for Rodeo Drive, a street of very expensive shops.
This is in GTA, right? I'm certain this is in GTA. I could be wrong though. Isn't this where you do the robbery heist, where you just rob the jewelry store?
And with many celebrities living around there and many Hollywood type things, you have a lot of talent agencies in Beverly Hills as well. The third enclave for Los Angeles I'm going to discuss is the city of San Fernando. This is located in the north end of the San Fernando Valley, so the city of San Fernando is just a small part of the overall San Fernando Valley. The city is 90% Hispanic, with most being Mexican, and over 70% speak Spanish at home. And the city of San Fernando is generally kind of poor, maybe a little below middle class, but it's not really high crime though. So you've probably heard of the San Fernando Valley, and many people in LA just refer to the whole thing as the Valley. But the part that actually has the name San Fernando is a separate entity at the far north end of LA, and it is an enclave. And the fourth enclave for the LA metro area I'm going to be discussing is not for Los Angeles itself, but for Long Beach, and the enclave is the city of Signal Hill. So Long Beach is a city along the coast that has about 458,000 people. It's the largest city in the metro after Los Angeles itself. And Long Beach, along with Los Angeles, is where you have the giant port complex there, which is the busiest port in the U.S. But Signal Hill is a small little enclave in the northern part of the city. It's about 11,000 people and about 2.2 square miles. It's called Signal Hill because it sits on a hill about 365 feet above the surrounding land. And what it is a geologic fold created by faulting and compression, and kind of the crest of it is Signal Hill as it pops up above the surrounding land. And that's exactly why the city of Signal Hill is separate from Long Beach, because of that oil field. It's referred to as the Long Beach oil field, and it is pretty large, but most of it is in the city of Signal Hill. In terms of economic stats, the household income and the poverty rates are pretty similar to the surrounding city of Long Beach. An interesting fact about the city is that it was incorporated in 1924, separate from Long Beach, and the first mayor elected was California's first female mayor. All right, now I'm going one state over to Arizona and the city of Tucson and the enclave of South Tucson. So as the name implies, it's south of
And this is right on like a highway, isn't it?
downtown Tucson.
I-10.
There are about 4,500 people
Or
that live
interstate.
there, but the population decline, and it's about 1 square mile. Tucson as a whole has about 545,000 people with population growth, and is about 241 square miles. It was incorporated in 1936 to avoid city of Tucson taxes, and its nickname is the Pueblo within a city. And this is quite possibly the poorest part of the Tucson metro area, has very low income and very high crime. It's about 50% poverty rate. Kids from South Tucson go to Tucson schools, but there's only a 58% high school graduation rate in South Tucson. So this area is pretty rough, and it's basically the exact opposite of the enclaves of the big cities in Texas. And an interesting fact, because South Tucson is an enclave of Tucson, you can live in Tucson, south of South Tucson, and have to go north to get to South Tucson. It all makes sense. Now I'm headed back to the Midwest and Indiana. I'm going to the city of Indianapolis and an enclave there called Speedway. Perhaps the thing
Wait, this is its own city? What?
that Indianapolis is most well known for is the Indianapolis 500 and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, but both of those are actually in the enclave of Speedway, which is a separate city. There are about 14,000 people there. It's about 4.8 square miles. And Indianapolis has about 879,000 people, and it's about 368 square miles. Speedway, the city, was founded in 1912 as a company town right after the track was built in 1909. So the city of Speedway is the racetrack, the stuff directly adjacent to it, and just a handful of neighborhoods around it. And again, it has about 14,000 people in the entire city. But it does have a nice little downtown as well with a cute main street with some locally owned businesses. And the racing economy isn't just the actual speedway and the race, but many of the headquarters of the racing teams. It's also home to a race car factory and an Allison transmission factory. But one thing it's always interesting to point out about the Indianapolis Motor Speedway is just how big it is.
That is pretty mad. The Yankee Stadium, Rose Bowl Stadium, Taj Mahal, Vatican City is tiny. Jeez. Well, there you go. Oh, this all fits in the track. I thought this was the track. This is Churchill Downs. Bloody hell. Oh, that is mad. I was just looking at this. Okay, this is pretty big. It's comparable to like a lot of Vatican City. No, it's this entire thing. Bloody hell.
It's a 2.5 mile oval, which means each straightaway is about 1 mile. So check out all of these things that can fit inside of the Motor Speedway. And just to go along with the theme of the city, with Speedway being the racing capital of the world, the fire hydrants in the city are painted like checkered flags.
Damn, that's pretty cool.
For this next one, I'm going to Colorado, the city of Denver, and its enclave of Glendale. And here's a fun one. It's an enclave of the city and county of Denver, but it's not part of the county of Denver either. It's an exclave of Arapahoe County. So this might be the only one that's both an exclave and an enclave. There are only about 5,000 people in Glendale, and it's only about a half a square mile. So it's very small, but has very dense development. There are office and housing development high-rises. There's a large recreation and event center, and it's even home to the first rugby-specific municipal stadium in the U.S. That's a lot of stuff to fit into a half a square mile, but
rugby stadiums in America.
It's lower income than the surrounding city of Denver, and most of the housing in Glendale are rentals. And like many other enclaves, it has its own police department, but gets fire services from the largest city around it, in this case, Denver. So if you're curious about a city that's both an exclave and an enclave that somehow fits all of this stuff in a half a square mile, well, that's Glendale, Colorado. And for this last one, I'm going to Missouri and the city of Kansas City and its enclave of Gladstone. This is located in the northwestern part of Kansas City. It has about 27,000 people, and it's about 8 square miles. Kansas City has about 510,000 people, and it's about 319 square miles. So Gladstone at 27,000 people and 8 square miles is really large for an enclave. It has lots of parks and green space, certainly more than you would expect for an enclave. But this isn't a really wealthy enclave. It's pretty average in terms of the surrounding area. There's a 10% poverty rate. It's just that it became a separate city in 1952 because the people didn't want to be annexed by the city of Kansas City. So I'm not talking about unincorporated enclaves in this video, but I did want to mention the fact that there are 4 unincorporated enclaves around Gladstone named Oakview, Oakwood Park, Oakwood, and oaks. And I would imagine there are quite a few maples in these enclaves. So that was my look at a handful of enclave cities.
Well, there we go. He always smashes, man. He always gives content that's just really fascinating. I do really appreciate the stuff that he does because this is such unique stuff, and he just goes out his way to find it. You sounded super quiet in this video. Yeah, it was quiet a bit. Just up the sound. That's what I did anyway. But to be fair, I have all the stuff to do. If you're watching it on your phone, it's probably a lot harder. But yeah, great video. I'm surprised Piedmont, is that how you say it? Piedmont, California, surrounded by Oakland, wasn't mentioned maybe in part 2. If you're from these places, like, is it like you're in your own city, or do you still have the perks of like obviously you still have the perks of being in a major city, right? But I don't know, like that college one, for example, you just seem to get all the perks. Is it University Park? You get all the perks of this place, but then you also get the perks of being in Dallas as well. That seems like a win-win, but I think that's a very rare occurrence. That's sort of the case, but yeah, I guess some of it works out, some of it doesn't. A lot of them seem to have been quite poor, but yeah, I guess it depends where they're located as well. But this is really interesting. If you're from these places, again, like I said, let me know. Would you say you're from Detroit if you're from that place, or would you say you're from LA if you're from that place, or yeah, like how would it work? I guess it depends on where you are, but yeah, hopefully you enjoyed, and until next time, subscribe and peace.